Do you think it's challenging to communicate this to other politicians or even to the American public? As you said, China has been very successful at propagandizing the American public. Like if people don't go through the experience of like having to fax an official, how do you change the dialogue so that the American people understand like this is an unfair relationship, that they don't just see, oh, why is the U.S. treating Chinese media like that?
Well, first off, we can't become them. We have to stay true to our values, and media freedom and all those things are those. It's a very frustrating question because I've been asking myself that a long time. A couple of things we tried that didn't really take off well because of the pandemic was there's a program called Hometown Diplomat where we get our our foreign service professionals to go back to their homes and then have these conversations one-on-one where it becomes real and personal. That was one. We had some success in that, going to the local Rotary. I'll tell you what really works, and it's things that U.S. government can't control. It's just, we control it by continuing to put the signal in the air that there's something wrong here. Enes Kanter, the Boston Celtics center, going off on Uyghur slave labor, oppression, locking him up, killing him on his shoes. That's making it real too. I use my kids as a barometer. And, if they're telling me that they're seeing something, then I know it's working. It's getting down to the level of, everyday Americans who really can't be expected to be worried about foreign policy and those things, right? They've got other things to do. That's kind of our job to take it off their plate. But how do you make it real to the American people? You eventually it has to come out in just public media, normal media conversations. And on the subject of media, we talk about political warfare and the PRC's efforts to divide and conquer inside the U.S. And if you watch the media over the years, it is definitely split and bifurcated where you have entirely different sets of facts. And I don't think that's entirely the CCP's doing, but we know that they've helped with that. They look for ways to make us so busy fighting each other that we're not even thinking about this problem of the PRC in China and the PRC activities inside the U.S. So that's something we have to work on, is getting the American narrative inside the U.S. More convergent, less divergent, getting people to agree on common sets of facts and discussing the areas we don't agree in the margins. That's a huge lift. And but we just have to talk about it. Education, critical thinking, and all the rest.
Can you give us an example of how the Chinese Communist Party leveraged wedge issues in the United States?
COVID origins. So 31st of January, we, with the NSC, closed the borders to China travel. Shortly after, we closed to Europe because Italy had become so badly infected because of their China diaspora. On the 3rd of February, Zhao Lijian, MFA spokesman, said, the U.S. is overreacting, closing the borders is racist, and the pandemic, the COVID, or at that time they were calling it the Wuhan Virus, is not such a big deal, and we've contained it in China. That was the narrative. And so we were criticized, the New York Times and others. Well, I don't know which papers exactly, but mainstream media criticized us for exactly that language. It was a racist decision. It's an overreaction. COVID's not that bad, etc. On the 4th of March, another, I think these were tweets from Zhao Lijian, said, the U.S. has badly botched the handling of COVID. So on the 3rd of February, we were overreacting and we followed WHO guidance and we shouldn't have done all these things. A month later, we're completely the opposite story. I could be wrong, but I don't remember seeing the words botched handling of COVID in the U.S. mainstream media until after I saw that tweet from Zhao Lijian. It's so easy to plant language and ideas into people's heads in the U.S. I'm not sure why they're repeating it, but it's a narrative that they've heard and they repeat it back in the media. This is where social media is dangerous because it picks these things up and perpetuates them without any rationality or critical thought going into them.
I mean, I wonder what your perspective inside the State Department was about also everything going on with the Wuhan Institute of Virology, because you couldn't even say anything about that and whether it could possibly have been a lab leak until almost a year later.
Yeah, that was another case. Like he called it a racist conspiracy theory, and that got picked up.
So early on, we recommended that we use the language Wuhan virus. And it was a really easy answer because that's what the Chinese called it and still call it, Wuhan Bingbi, right?
Mm-hmm.
If that's how they refer to it, and because it originated in Wuhan, and everybody knows that, there should have been no argument. But the PRC media and other influence operations in the U.S. are at least partly to blame for the narrative that somehow calling it the Wuhan virus is racist. Wuhan is not a race. China is not a race. Han is a race. There's nothing racist about attributing the origins of viruses to the location. Ebola, Zika. I mean, how many, with Spanish flu, how many other diseases like this, especially pandemics? Hong Kong flu. I mean, I lived through that. My mom got very sick from the Hong Kong flu in the 60s. Nobody was complaining about it at the time because we knew that's where it came from. Recommendation for your listeners, Guns, Germs, and Steel, really good book about guns, germs, and steel, but the germs part, about the origins of disease. Tight groups of people living in close proximity and tight groups of animals, as in raising animals, in close proximity is how you get this jumping of viruses between humans and animals. And remember, China was technologically far advanced throughout history in things like agriculture and the rest. And this is why you see these diseases typically originating in places like China. And I think in the book, Guns, Germs, and Steel, he asserts that the majority of disease jumping from people to humans and back, or to animals and back, come from the place where this high-tech way of feeding yourself originated. So your original question, I think, was how that narrative got picked up. Again, you have inserts in most major newspapers. You have full access to American media, and really no way for us to counter that in China. That is it's a threat vector that we should address.
I'm kind of reminded of how every time anybody talks about Taiwan in Western media, the words "angering China" appear in the headline. Anything anybody does that's positive towards Taiwan is going to anger China, and that is the framework. That's just the default framework. And how did we get there?
One thing we tried to do was rewind our relationship with Taiwan back to 1979 and review the original documents and the original agreements with the PRC, and look at Taiwan's original international presence, both in the UN, kind of, but mostly in terms of its partners. Right, it's down to 15 right now, and that's by design. It's deliberate. The PRC is trying to basically cut off all recognition of Taiwan and making it more difficult for them to operate in the world. Look, Taiwan was the first to recognize this problem. I think it was early December. They went to Wuhan when they first got inklings that there was a problem. They went to Wuhan and said, "Yep, there's a problem," and they hauled back Taiwan, shut the gates, and did pretty well in surviving. And this is why we sent Health and Human Services Secretary to Taiwan in August of 2020 to get a better idea of how they did it and things we could be doing better here in the U.S. Making Taiwan radioactive, don't touch that, has been their strategy and was being quite effective. But if you go back and look at the Taiwan Relations Act, it didn't say anything about cutting off our relationship with Taiwan. In fact, it says that we will provide material of a defensive nature to ensure that the question of Taiwan is resolved through dialogue, not coercion or use of force. We're seeing lots of coercion here with the threat of use of force. We want to get that back to resolving the question of Taiwan, because it's still an open question, through dialogue. That's the agreement. That's the agreement that the PRC made as well in the 3 communiques. So this is why we're talking to Taiwan, working with Taiwan, using Taiwan's advanced technology in terms of semiconductors and bringing those to the U.S. and TSMC. Those are all things that are completely allowed inside the agreement with the PRC and inside our own laws, the Taiwan Relations Act. And we just, Keith Kroc at the time decided to take advantage of that and use that, because that brings jobs to the U.S. It brings high tech to the U.S. This helps us.
So when the U.S. switched diplomatic relations from Taiwan, the ROC, to the PRC in '79, my understanding is that at that time, the Chiang Kai-shek government of Taiwan still believed that they were the legitimate China and may one day retake the mainland. But clearly that is not the case now. And if if you go to Taiwan, which we have many times, it does not seem like most people, especially younger people, consider themselves anything but, a separate country. Do you think that the U.S. relationship with Taiwan has kept pace with the shifting viewpoint in Taiwan?
Well, unlike our counterparts in Beijing, who provide endless empty promises, Hong Kong, 2015, we won't militarize South China Sea. I mean, there is not an agreement they've made yet. Paris, how about the Montreal Convention, where they said they would stop producing chlorofluorocarbons? They took money to help transition their industry away from CFCs. They only increased CFCs while taking the money. So there's no agreement that PRC won't back out on, because as they say, it's just scraps of paper. On the other hand, again, we can't stoop to that level. We have to stand up and comply. We need to follow our own agreements and be seen as trustworthy in that regard. If we fail that, then we're just as bad as the communist government is. So I think we are completely aligned with our agreement. We're operating inside the boundaries of our agreements with the PRC, and we have to trust that is going to preserve the status quo. But trust but verify. The fact that the Japanese have now come on very strong vocally, saying that we too will come to Taiwan's aid should the PRC do something unfortunate in terms of attack or whatever. Always prepared in case the PRC violates its agreement. That's a deterrent. And again, I was so happy to hear the Japanese side come on board in alongside the U.S. And there are others who are doing the same. I mean, you're actually seeing the EU and NATO also recognizing that we need to all stand up together on this, or it could get much worse in an effort to deter. So to your point, Taiwan's expectations of what the future looks like have moderated. The thought of taking over the mainland obviously were overblown at the time and don't make any sense now. They just want to be able to continue to do what they're doing, exist as they are, as a democracy and a free market economy and all the rest. And the U.S. is committed to support that.